Hello, everyone. My name is Jessa Lux, and I'm the community manager for a digital design agency called Clique Studios, and I'm also one of the creators of Clique Elevate. And Clique Elevate is a membership group to connect and support the next generation of CMOs. So this interview today and our monthly interview series in general is part of Clique Elevate. So welcome to everyone who's a Clique Elevate member. Also, welcome to anyone who's just checking Clique Elevate out today. I'm so glad that you are all here because I'm really, really excited for this conversation that we're going to have. It's with Michael Barber, and Michael is a brand consultant and marketing strategist, and he works with incredible brands like MeUndies and Ithaca College and Johnson & Johnson. And he also has some amazing accomplishments, like he was listed to Marketo's 50 Fearless Marketing Leaders list, which I'm going to ask him more about. He also was behind the most cost-effective campaign ever for a Fortune 500 company. And he has a lot to teach us today. One of the things that we're going to talk about is sacrifice, both how it relates to brands. So brands can't or shouldn't be all things to all people. So there's sacrifice involved in that. And then also sacrifice for individuals who are pursuing leadership and kind of the sacrifice that goes along with that career growth and pursuing that. So I can't wait to dive into it. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today.
No worries at all, Jessa. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And just to set the stage a little bit, this is going to be about 45 minutes, a pretty candid conversation. So as you have questions, please put those in the chat and I will relay them to Michael. And to get started, let's just start with kind of a lighthearted question. Michael, what has been the highlight of your week so far?
The highlight of my week so far. Well, I live in Washington, D.C. So, and if you're not familiar with the district, I live in Capitol Hill, which is right around the U.S. Capitol. That Capitol grounds area, which has been obviously closed off since January 6th, the insurrection, reopened in the last few days. And it is my favorite walk with my dog, Manny, he is laying right here. It is our favorite walk every morning to go all the way up to the Capitol and around. So that's probably the highlight of my week thus far, is getting the chance to walk right next to the Capitol again, as if we were back before January 6th.
That's really cool. And I would imagine that would be a special thing to get back to. I think that area to walk or run around is the most, for me, it's like the most special feeling ever to be in that area, walking or running and just taking it in.
For sure. I mean, you don't even have to, for me, I don't even work in politics. Like, I'm so far removed from what happens in this city. I couldn't be farther away from the political process and what I do every single day and what I'm focused on during the day. And so I still get the chills every now and then when I look around at the monuments, and to have the chance to walk around the Capitol, particularly, I mean, it is the seat of democracy. And, regardless of the challenges that our country, the US, faces right now, I think it's still incredibly special that we can walk right up to where our elected officials are doing their work. And that's why I think it's so important we should have access to that area. And so I was really happy to, and I think most of DC is happy to have access, as well as people who are coming to the city to check it out, to be able to walk and walk right up to it and see the history of our country. So
totally. And I bet Manny was happy about it too.
He's happy too. I mean, this one likes to walk anywhere, so he'll be happy whether we're walking at the Capitol or walking down a regular sidewalk. It doesn't matter to him as long as he's outside enjoying the sunshine.
Yeah. Well, he seems to have pretty much claimed that entire couch, which is how it should be. That's what my couch
this is here for him. I mean, it's supposed to be the guest. It folds out to our guest bed. This is our second bedroom. And but it's largely his couch, which always we chuckle at, given the expense of buying a piece of furniture that largely becomes your dog's.
Totally. So, well, I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. And I hope my dog can hear you so that she is grateful. Anyways, at the start, I talked about career growth a little bit, and maybe to add some context to the conversation, would you mind giving us just a quick overview of what your career path has been so far?
For sure. So I have to say, I was really fortunate and just incredibly lucky. I think part of getting to a place of leadership particularly in a marketing role like a CMO role or something at that level, involves being in the right place at the right time, a little bit of luck, and a lot of hard work. And I was very, very fortunate right out of college to get a job at a tiny little ad agency called Mighty Interactive. It happened to be owned by a gentleman by the name of Jay Baer. If you're not familiar with Jay, he's written, I mean, I think at this point, 4 or 5 New York Times best-selling books on marketing, word of mouth, digital, any number of topics. And Jay's just an incredible human being. And back in the day, Mighty was one of the first agencies doing a lot of really interesting work on this tiny little platform called Exact Target. For those who have been around the block for a little while, like myself, right, with the oldies and the goodies, Exact Target went on to be acquired by Salesforce. It is the backbone of Salesforce's marketing cloud. And we were one of the first agencies that were doing really incredible work in the email marketing space for a variety of brands. And so just learn from the best being there. And Jay essentially has handed me off to various places throughout my career saying, you got to take this opportunity, you got to look for this opportunity. Went on to agencies like Sitewire, where we ran global search campaigns for a variety of big multinational companies. Took a leap of faith and went to this tiny little shop called Nomadic. I was like the 8th employee. We turned that agency into the small agency of the year as ranked by Ad Age. Did some incredible work with the likes of Ubisoft, Southwest Airlines, Microsoft, and then took a break because I would imagine there are a few attendees that have been on the agency side. And when you're in that sort of middle management, just starting to get on the higher leadership roles inside of an agency, you are working your butt off. And I just got drained on like an 80-hour work week for a number of years and decided, hey, I can, the other thing that had happened is I had started speaking at a couple conferences. So the speaking roles were leading to consulting opportunities. I just thought, if now's the time to take a break, let's take a break and see if we can do this on my own. And did that for several years, and then got connected with an agency owner in Denver called COHN. And we built what was the first text message location-based text messaging platform in the world called Value Text. That got sold off, went through the whole startup phase, and then went back to being a consultant after doing that. Got acquired. We were a shop of 2 to 3, we were 3 strategists at the time. Got acquired and merged with a company called Godfrey, which is one of the largest B2B agencies in the country. Spent 3 years there as the head of the creative team and chief creative officer, and then left after my earnout just this past year. And I've been freelancing for a couple of the brands that you mentioned the last few months through the pandemic.
Wow. You mentioned luck, but also every step of the way, what you are involved in seems to be having some pretty incredible accomplishments. So I'm sure luck might have initially been part of it, but that is an amazing career path so far. And you've had your hands in some really exciting things.
Yeah, it's been, again, it's right place, right time, right? I've always tried to, the next steps for me have always been, do I want to work with these people? That's the first question that I always ask, is because if you're going to spend the amount of time that you do as a marketer in roles, number one, you better love the people that are around you. Number two, it should be somewhat fun. I think there's a lot of parts of our business that are not fun. So as much as you can over-index on the fun, trying to find those places that have got interesting opportunities and doing interesting things has always been sort of a perspective I try and take on, hey, taking that next role, or a lens, I should say, is of what I try and make that decision. And then again, just, right place, right time of agencies and different brands that are just about to do something interesting and have really just lucked out in that perspective. Yeah.
So as people are pursuing their own career growth and maybe higher levels of leadership, they can ask themselves similar questions like, do I want to work with these people? Would I find this interesting? Is there anything else? I know you do a lot of speaking engagements. So the question is there any other advice so people can find themselves in those right places or with those right people that might help expedite their trajectory?
Always make sure that wherever you're going to work, if those people around you do not impress you, or you don't get this feeling of like, I'm going to learn something from this experience, it is probably a really good sign that it is not the best decision to be taking that next role, even if it leads to a new title, a new salary, because if you are not, Jay, I think instilled into all of his team members early on, if you're not learning, you're dying. And yes, it sounds very dramatic, but particularly I think for marketers and leaders today, we have to be willing to, well, number one, admit that we don't know, we don't have the answers to everything, and we've got to figure some things out because marketing is touching so many different parts of the business than we ever have done before. And so there's a lot of, it takes I think a lot of humility to say, I don't get it, but I'm going to get into the weeds and figure it out. And so back to the original question of sort of the thing that you've got to be looking for to make these decisions is, one, again, for me, it's, are the people around you, are you going to love working with them? And are they going to make you better at what you do? Are they going to make you show up better? Are they going to make sure, because of the hard work they're putting in, are they going to make sure that you're motivated to do that hard work? Are you going to have a ton of fun? I think the last two for me are always going to be very much selfish. I think there's a conversation that I think happens whenever you're stepping into a higher role around salary and benefits. And I think we have to be selfish, regardless of who we are. That as we're stepping into those roles, we are hopefully earning more pay or more benefits, whatever the thing that we want to over-index as an individual, that it is meeting those expectations. And particularly, I think when you're in that middle management role and you're stepping into more leadership roles, is looking for those opportunities that allow you to over-index as much as possible on the things that matter to you. If that's money, great. If that's some sort of benefits or time off or whatever it is that the company you're looking at or the organization you're looking at is going to provide for you, then over-index on those things, especially as you're stepping into leadership roles, because it does a couple of key things for you. Provides a place for you to negotiate for every single future role beyond that opportunity you're taking, right? Especially if you are younger, the more benefits and salary and the more money you can make allows you to make better decisions for you, your family, or whoever is dependent upon you in the future. So I look for those four key components when I'm looking for a new role, particularly if I'm going back into an organization versus working as a consultant for an organization.
I think that's really smart advice, because what you agree to each step of the way does set you up in a different way for the next step.
It does,
so that effort makes a lot of sense to me. One other thing that I wanted to get your perspective on is, do you think that the role of marketing leaders or expectations of marketing leaders is changing? And if the answer is yes, how can people deliver on that?
Dramatically. And I think one of the biggest challenges we are having as marketers is meeting the need of what's changing around us, especially as leaders. If you look back just, a decade ago, marketers were charged largely with promotion, right? It was advertising and promotion and the elements around that, brand, promotion, and all of the elements that are encompassed there. The challenge for marketers now is we touch so many parts of the business. We're touching experience, we're touching tech, and this larger sort of global experience that we're trying to provide for customers touches so much more than just the promotional and advertising efforts that we as marketers, that's our bread and butter. And we are charged not only with the external facing comms that an organization is putting together, but so much more with what's happening internally as well. And we're not, largely, there are not a lot of, whether we're going to school for this education or whether we're learning on the job, there is not a lot of great resources for us to learn how to do those jobs well. And so the challenge for us is, how do we meet the needs of all the different departments and all cross-functionally across organizations, the expectations for us to be able to deliver on what our customers need, what the end user needs, where we are having to deal with all the different facets of an organization than we ever have done before. And largely, there's not a great way as a marketer, as you're getting through your career, unless you get into the nitty-gritty, unless you be a little bit humble about the fact that you don't have the answers to all these questions, of getting quote unquote trained or being prepared to take on all these different facets of the organization that many marketing leaders are being asked to do right now.
That is definitely a massive shift. And it's a theme that I've heard in talking to our Clique Elevate members. That's a challenge that comes up over and over, which is like, how do I, the biggest one that I hear is the managing internal cross-departmental efforts. So it's definitely being felt. What you're saying is being felt by people, but I think you're right. Like there's just not a lot of crystal clear guidance on how to navigate that correctly.
Yeah, I think the only thing we can do is find really good mentors who are either at the same level that we are, because I don't think a mentor has to be someone that's been there, done that, so they can impart that wisdom, and certainly can be. But it's finding people that are either on the same level inside of an organization doing a similar role as us that you can be a sounding board for and hear what they're doing. I think some of the most rewarding moments that I'm having in my career right now are building small groups of either fellow consultants or CMOs or VP level marketers, and having tight relationships with them in WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups and the like, to really understand, well, first, it allows us to be all brutally honest with each other that there's a lot we don't know how to do, and being able to say that to a group of people that understands and is empathetic towards us being honest about where we're at in our careers and where we're at with our organizations, but also to hear how they are tackling the same challenges inside of their organizations. And then I think the other thing we have to do is look for those people who have gone through this process, right? That have either been a CMO or been a VP of marketing, even if it was a few years ago. There's so much wisdom that they can bring to how we approach, how we lead our team members, how we lead different groups inside the organization, and perspective that they can provide, or at least point us in the right direction to other people that can help us learn more. I think those relationships, particularly as we're building our sort of networks of people we can have these conversations with, it's not just about finding that mentor that's been there, done that. It's also about finding like-minded individuals, well, not necessarily even like-minded, but individuals that are doing the same things that you're doing inside of other organizations, so you can hear how they're tackling those challenges as well.
I completely agree. And I have to plug Clique Elevate right now. I know pretty much everyone on the phone.
I teed it up for you.
Yeah, you totally teed it up. But it's one of the reasons we created Clique Elevate, because especially, I mean, when we created Clique Elevate, it was during the pandemic. So it was especially harder to make these connections and have those conversations. And we're doing, monthly roundtables so that we can just provide the space and time to have conversations about the experiences and challenges that we're having, and learn from one another versus staying day in and day out within the same work and the same team. So thank you for that. And I also wanted to ask a question from somebody who's in the audience, which says, with all of those touch points, do you recommend that marketers build skills across each, or become an expert in one particular? So creative versus analytics or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sort of like harp on something that we hear all the time, but I'm like a big advocate of a T-shaped employee or a T-shaped team member, right? Somebody that really understands one part of the business, but then understands the implications broadly across the organization. So at least for me, what I found is the leaders that have the most impact are the ones who deeply understand marketing strategy at a strategic level. Maybe they are also deep experts in one or two tactics within the marketing that they're doing inside of an organization. And then they understand how those tactics fit into experience and finance and accounting and customer service and those sorts of things, right? So they can help broadly impact what they're doing at the marketing level across the organization. I also think that, especially if you're in that CMO role or that VP of marketing role, the people that I've seen do really, really well are individuals who really trust their immediate team leads within their marketing department, right? So there has to be a huge amount of trust at the level that's right underneath you, right? Your senior director of content, your senior director of creative, your senior director of brand, your senior director of growth, or however your that sort of middle management layer is defined. It's different for every organization, but you've got to really be able to lean into those individuals to deal with the day-to-day expectations of what they're doing and their team, so that you can focus more broadly on impacting other parts of the organization, as well as being able to advocate on behalf of marketing into the C-level, and into boards and into your investment groups that may be investing in your organization, because marketers are being asked to represent what they're doing as a department at the board level and within the investment communities that may be investing in the organization that you're working on behalf of. So the good ones build really good team layers right underneath them, lean into those team leads to be able to build those relationships and execute across the organization, and then broadly impact at the same level that they are other parts of the organization, and be able to speak on behalf of marketing, or understand how marketing ties into those, or understand how they can impact those other parts of the organization.
It's definitely coming across how important it is to have a team of people you work with that is incredibly talented, that you can learn from, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see more and more VPs and CMOs that sort of pick up and take their teams with them. You're seeing that more and more than you've seen in the past, and it's a bit of an unfortunate experience. Obviously, for existing teams, as a new CMO comes in, you may see them, potentially change directions and bring in new team members that can help them impact. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's a significant level of trust that's been built up for years and years and years that allows them to impact the organization at a greater level. That's not to say that I think that happens all the time. It is incredibly hard, especially in today's cycles of CMO average tenure only being what I think like 18-ish months at the moment. 18 to 21-ish months is the last time I looked at the data. If you're a senior leader coming into an organization, especially at the marketing level, and you've got to get to know your team, and you've done it, and during the pandemic, in fact, it's been even more challenging. 6 months to a year before you've built up a relationship with your team, right? Just to be able to have the honesty and transparency and the conversations that lead to really, really good work. Suddenly, if your average tenure is only an additional 8 months, 6 months, 12 months, how much impact can you have when it takes that long to build the relationship amongst those teams? So bringing teams with you often becomes a much easier task for CMOs to make an impact on an organization.
Absolutely. And I'm truly having to bite my tongue at additional questions that are coming up, because I could talk to you all day, I'm realizing, but I'll get through some of the ones that I for sure wanted to hit. I am fascinated by consultants in general, because I think they have this really unique and special perspective of being able to see patterns that exist at different organizations or companies, and also start seeing what generally works and what generally doesn't work. So as a brand consultant, I just want to pick your brain on some of the takeaways that you've gotten from getting to work with different organizations, and you're in different industries as well, which I think is really interesting. So maybe we could start with, is there a common challenge or mistake that you see on the marketing teams that you've worked with or been exposed to?
I think one of the things you and I talked about when we started talking about this, what this conversation was going to look like, was one of those common things is brands trying to be all things to all people. You have to be able to put a line in the sand, a flagpole, or whatever the euphemism is, an analogy, right? You have to be able to say, this is what we stand for, and this is who we are, and this is who we serve. Because without it, you will never understand where you're fishing as a marketing leader. And too often than not, and there are certain industries that are very much more susceptible to that common mistake of trying to be everything to all people. It makes the creative weaker, it makes the brand weaker, it makes the tactics that you're doing weaker, it makes your messaging weaker. It just makes everything weaker when you can't put a line in the sand and say, this is who we are, and that becomes the filter for everything, for your brand strategy, for your messaging, for how you go to market, for how you launch products. So certainly that's one. The other one that I see is a real lack of courage. I work with Ryan Berman, who has written a book about courage that I would encourage courage. I would encourage everyone to go take a read. It's called The Return on Courage. And Ryan looked at several brands for a number of years to find out why they were having the impact that they were having. And what he found is the common trait of brands that were doing big, audacious things was courage. And he defines courage as three parts: knowledge, faith, and action. And without all three, knowledge being strategy, faith being a willingness to, really put all your eggs in a basket, or at least lean into what your brand strategy is and say, this is who we are, and I believe in what we're doing. And then action, actually doing the thing you said you were going to do, is what he found as he defined courage. Those were the three things that he found in organizations that were doing big things. And so you do often see, I think, a big challenge for marketers and brands these days is the courage to say, this is who we are and this is who we serve, and actually going to do those things and executing those plans. And for the most part, we have a lot of the first part, we have a lot of knowledge. Like, there's no lack of data for organizations, whether it's first party data or whether it's third party data. There's so much data we have at our disposal as marketers. We're drowning in it. We're hamstringed by it too often than not. Where we lack, I think, and where we could use a little bit more courage is leaning into the faith and action parts, right? In believing in the impact we can have as a brand, in the impact we can have on the communities of our brand advocates and our customers, and actually going to do something, that action part. And so again, I think beyond just wanting to be all things, it's this lack of courage. Beyond that, I think the biggest challenge for every marketing team that I see across all these industries is a lack of the C-level really understanding marketing's role in the modern mix of what they do as an organization. And you see organizations that doing really, really well. And this is why I don't understand why more leaders don't see the value of what marketing brings. It's not just about putting butts in seats and driving sales. It is about the impact that organization can bring to the world. It is about the impact of how marketers can help connect with consumers in really different ways these days. And the amount of work and effort that it takes to do that, I don't think is appreciated at the C-level. And it's an easy complaint to make. I'm just very fortunate that I get to see patterns repeat themselves, as you say, over and over again. And too often than not, that is one. It is that most senior leaders of organizations, especially in the C-suite, have a really keen understanding of the numbers, finance, P&L, meeting the expectations of shareholders. They probably have an MBA where they spent maybe 4 to 8 weeks on marketing, and that's their marketing education. And it's a lack of having a lot of trust and faith in the marketing team to build a brand that stands out and meet the needs of customers and continually build advocacy on behalf of those customers. I think that's always a challenge. So again, wanting to be all things, not having the courage to step out and say, this is who we are. And then two, not having that senior leader who really believes in the value of what marketing brings to the organization are things that I see too often than not.
So to dig specifically into the first one, being all things to all people, so that whatever stand you take doesn't turn off a customer or potential customer, I would just like to understand better, like in practice, how can somebody execute that? And I can picture like Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia. I can understand the ones that are kind of like way at the forefront of it, how they're taking a stand. Should it be like, I'm guessing it's not something that's just political, but can you just describe to me more about how a company could take a stand that helps them in that way, so that I can start, like, just have the skills to brainstorm what that could look like?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the very least, it comes back to defining who your core customer is, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be anything political or cultural or otherwise. It can be, and those things can provide a lot of impact, but it takes a lot to manage a brand that is taking a stand day in, day out. So just be prepared if you're going to do that as a brand. there's a lot of things you've got to be prepared to handle on a daily basis of whether you're going to choose to engage in conversations that are politically and culturally relevant and whether you're not going to, because the expectation is if you are going to take a stand on those things, you're going to participate in them whenever they happen. Otherwise, you're not standing for anything again. But at the very least, it's about defining this is who we are and this is who we serve, right? So if that's at just a basic customer level, this idea of not being all things to all people can also just be very simply, this is who we serve. We serve this particular age, this type of person who believes this, who is looking for this and needs these sorts of solutions, right? It can be that simple of a task. And then from there, it's really about understanding, okay, is the brand that I'm working on behalf of or working for, do they want to participate in the cultural and political conversations of and narratives of the day? And then that's a whole other layer thing. But to answer that question as succinctly as possible, at a very minimum, it is defining who are we serving, who are we for, who are we trying to attract? And the answer to that question cannot be everyone. It has to be a certain slice, a certain segment of the population.
Okay, that helps me a lot. Thank you. Because it's something that I have been curious about. So the other thing is kind of the flip side of that question, which is there something that you see that's generally helpful to a marketing team or to their success?
So sort of like what separates good from the not so good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a deep appreciation for brand is one that I see. Good marketing teams typically are understand what brand is, why it matters, and why an investment level at the brand level is important. Because otherwise they're incredibly focused on sales, which is certainly part of the job, part of the gig. But we have to appreciate the value of brand to build advocacy and retention, which is certainly less expensive than acquisition and going after new customers at this point. So an appreciation of brand. Really good practitioners is another trait that I see, right? So a lot of marketers that I see do big things and do incredible work, like are experts in something. Is it search? Is it email? Is it social? Is it content? Is it strategy? Is it consumer insights? It's a thing, and they're very good at that thing. And then they understand the impact of that thing across the organization. So they're really good practitioners. They're like willing to get into the weeds to figure something out. Why? Because when you're willing to, I think, get in the weeds, you understand a deeper impact of what it takes to execute the work. And I always have a deep appreciation for people, regardless of where they are in an organization, that understand the nitty gritty, right, of what it takes to execute a campaign or bring a brand to life or do a rebrand or a redesign or change the entire back-end tech structure and stack of their website or their entire infrastructure, if you will. And then the last thing is you always typically see those good marketing teams have solid leaders and or C-level support, right? They've got the CMO who is willing to go to bat for them, I should say. And they've got the support at the C-level. And that's not only in just verbalizing that support, but it's also comes in the form of budget. It comes in the form of headcount to support the business and the goals of that organization, the business goals, as well as the marketing goals that are leveling up into those business goals. So it's not just about the sort of lip service that's being paid of the value of marketing and brand, but it's also about the proof in the pudding, right? That marketing is getting funded, that headcount that's necessary is there to help do the work. Not saying that you've got to, as a CEO, go hire for every single role that's possible for a marketing team. I'm not saying that, right? It's got to serve the best interest of the business. But if the team and the leader of that team is asking for headcount and justifying that headcount, it's being willing to make that sacrifice in order to have a larger impact on the organization.
Got it. And we worked in sacrifice again. I love it.
Yeah.
I have one more question, and then we have a couple that came through the Q&A that I'll get to. I mentioned at the top that you were named to Marketo's 50 Fearless Marketing Leaders list. And one, what did you do to earn that recognition? And two, is being fearless something that continues to play into your approach to marketing?
So the way that you get nominated somehow by your team. I just happened to be nominated by my team at Godfrey, and I appreciate that nomination, and obviously getting the nod from Marketo and the team at Adobe, who I just think is an incredibly intelligent and sort of a thought leader, if you will, in our space of marketing, and does marketing so well. And yes, to answer this question of does being a good marketer require fearlessness? Sure, it's hard to do these things. It's hard to put creative and campaigns that you have tirelessly and toiled over for a couple of months, a year. It's hard to put that work out in public and be okay with the criticism. And it's something I think all of us as marketers and creatives struggle with, is putting our work out there and then being okay with the noise. And it's something I talk to my teams about regularly, about, hey, sometimes the comment section is a good thing and sometimes it's a very, very bad thing. You have to be willing as a creative to go into the quote unquote comment section. And I'm not just talking about like the YouTube comment section, but I'm talking about like what your peers and what your industry is saying about your brand and the work that's coming out, because there are good learnings there. Yeah, there's a lot of noise and there's stuff that's going to hurt, but part of our willingness as being marketers and creatives is the ability to be fearless enough to say, this is what we did and this is why we did it. You've got to be able to defend the work. Even if it's the wrong defense as far as everyone's concerned, you've got to be willing to defend the work. And I will also say that is one of the things that I love seeing from marketing leaders, is a willingness to defend the work, even if it's been criticized. It doesn't mean you have to, say, yes, we did this and we stand behind it. You can say, yeah, we did it because of these reasons. It may not have been the right work for these reasons, right? You can fall back on potentially, potentially not defending it all the way, but the willingness to say, this is why we did it and this is why it matters, I think has huge impacts on your team. The person that I think of constantly that does this so incredibly well is Fer Marchado, who used to be the CMO at Burger King. I think he's left Burger King at this point. I'm not quite sure where he's at, but I know he's not there anymore. But he does such a good job. When Burger King made a few missteps in the last 2 years, he was there to say, here's why we did it. Okay, maybe it wasn't the best thing to do, but I'm not going to be critical of my team and the work that's put out there. So yes, I think, if you're going to work in this business, especially as a senior leader, be prepared to read the comment section, because there's a lot of learnings for you. And two, it provides a lot of humility, because certainly if people are being critical, sometimes you learn from that stuff and allows your hubris to not get in the way in the future for other work.
Definitely keeps us humble.
For sure.
That's a great lesson in leadership, though, standing behind your team and your work. And it's not something that everybody does. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm going to go into the Q&A now, and my apologies because I'm reading this for the first time along with everybody, but your work spans industries that have traditionally different takes on marketing. So education versus retail versus B2B. Which industry do you feel is leading trends in tactics? So which has the most opportunity to learn from? In other words, as a future marketing leader, what industry should I pay attention to regardless of the industry that I'm in?
So this is a lovely question, Theodore. I'm not quite sure what you go by day to day, but this is a really lovely question. There's not a specific answer for you in terms of, hey, this is the industry to look at. I will give you a couple of answers. I think some of the brands that are doing growth really well are the DTC brands, right? The direct to consumer brands. They have, the reason why you have seen the plethora of brands come to the marketplace that are, building new products and things that the CPGs and the big companies have done incredibly well, is because they are incredibly good at getting in front of their targeted consumer and knowing who their target is and going after it as aggressively as possible. So if you're looking for inspiration for growth and tactics in that area, look at the DTC organizations. If you're looking for scale and how to scale an organization, the kings of scale are the big CPG organizations, right? They know how to scale, they know how to do it incredibly well. globally in different nations across the world, those are the ones that you've got to look for, how they go about doing that, right? How do you bring a brand to life across 130 or 150 countries is something that, regardless of whether you think Coke is a good thing or not, or you think Tide detergent is good or not, you know, for the environment or whatever, they've done an incredible job at scale and keeping that scale at a global level. When I look at different industries, like some of the ones you named in here, retail, you've got to go look at the bellwethers that are doing really interesting work. These are the Apples of the world that are, and I hate to use that as like the hang my hat example on, but there's no other company that's doing retail as well as Apple these days, and they continue to reinvent themselves. They continue to reinvent the retail experience. You know, that started years ago, and then Angela Earhart's came in from Burberry and redid a, you know, made the retail experience even better than what it was, and they've continued to do that. Look at the space that they just created in LA and in an old theater, right? This idea of how do you combine the things that their products do so well with the retail experience? It's astounding. I think you've got to look for, to try, I don't want to belabor the point because I want to get to a couple more questions, but as a leader, I would look for different industries for different things that you're looking for inspiration in. I do think, as a generic answer, the DTC brands are doing really interesting things, and they're upending a number of industries. So looking at them as what they do, not as the perfect example, certainly, because some of them have made incredibly bad mistakes. You think Uber, you think some of the challenges that Airbnb is facing as of late, but they do paint a really interesting model for marketing and branding that I think other industries aren't doing well.
Is there a DTC? I know there's a ton of them. Is there a DTC brand or CPG brand that comes to mind for the things you mentioned?
That has not had some sort of like cultural misstep in the past.
I know that's hard.
I'm always like, this is one of the things I'm going to struggle with at conferences over the next couple of years, is like showing examples, because everyone's had a misstep or two. You know, I'm trying to think of one off the top. Oh, I think, okay, so a brand that I have really loved seeing what they've done is Supergoop, which is a sunscreen brand out of LA that I think's done really interesting things in the space. That's just sort of redefined the meaning of what sunscreen should be for humans, and really leaned into that positioning. As I think of like the CPGs, there's not a great one. It's certainly not Kraft Heinz. It's sort of the more traditionals. It's the Unilevers and the P&Gs. I think they're doing some interesting work. You look at the work that's coming out of Oreo, which I'm trying to think of who owns Oreo, which is not coming to the top of my head right now. But I think, you know, you look at some of the changes that the CPG companies have had to do to compete against the DTCs has been really interesting, whether it's acquiring them or looking at their tactics and then adopting them. I think that certainly the biggies of the world, the P&Gs and the Unilevers, are probably the ones to hang your hats on and look at as examples. So
yeah, that makes sense. Mondelez International is the owner of Oreo, produced by
Mondelez. Yeah.
Mondelez.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 1 minute. Do you mind if I ask you one more question?
Yes.
How often should a brand take a step back and determine if their values or even their customer base has changed? And how would you address that? So the example that he gave is Mountain Dew started off catering to a very different customer base than their current extreme sports or extreme gamers focus. Is that a gradual shift, or is it like a brand shakeup?
So for Mountain Dew, that was certainly a gradual shift, right? As you got past the 80s and early 90s, the sort of grandpas that were drinking Mountain Dew, and I say grandpas because my grandpa was a massive Mountain Dew drinker in his day and age, and I don't think I've touched the stuff in 20 years. It was a gradual shift as it relates to that particular brand. I think good marketers are always paying attention to where their customers are. I think that they are putting themselves in the shoes of where their customers are. They're like going into retail, or they're going to events that may not be the things that they do. and experiencing what it feels like to be a customer or to like sit in someone else's shoes, and have empathy for that experience that individual is happening, or at least hiring good people that have a perspective on that empathy, on that experience that their customers are having, and then being able to have empathy for that experience. But I think that so for part one and part two of this question, how often do you take a step back? I don't think it's ever about taking a step back. I think it's constantly leaning into what's happening right now and how could this impact us in the future. And I do think that values aren't something that change all the time. If your brand is changing your values constantly, then it's just wavering in the wind. You've got to stand up for what you believe in, lean into those things. Doesn't mean that every year to 2 years, every 5 years, every decade, that a monumental shift in your brand might need to happen. That could be the case for a lot of reasons. But the core values that you build your bedrock on and say, this is who we are and this is who we stand for, I don't think those things change very often unless there has been a significant cultural shift or a shift in your consumers and what they're paying attention to.
Wow, I feel like so fired up, which is a great way to feel after talking to somebody for 45 minutes, I suppose. So I know we're 1 minute over. Michael, I know you ran the most cost-effective campaign for a Fortune 500. You also had the most value-packed Clique Elevate interview. So I'm going to go back and take notes right now. Thank you so much for everything that you taught us today and just for taking the time to be with us.
For sure, and happy to come back anytime. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone who was able to make it, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye, everyone.